Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to go through why your sales are dropping and your conversion rates are dropping, even though you haven't touched ads, mess with emails, or anything like that, okay? So we're actually gonna run through the McKinsey report, which just went through the last period on consumer confidence, consumer spending, all that kind of thing, because unless you're a brand that's doing at least $100 million a year or more, you're a very small boat in a huge ocean, and so whenever there's waves, the wind shift, there's a whirlpool, you're going to really feel those effects, right? And so many people talk about, hey, here's how you optimize your ads, your emails, your website conversion, your COGS, all that kind of thing. But in reality, if you're just aware of what's going on in the ocean, in this economic climate, you can brace yourself, you can invest capital better, and you can really prepare and actually make the most of it versus just getting hit and blindsided, okay? So let's run through the report. This will be very straightforward, and let's get right into it. Cool? So this is the monthly update for June from McKinsey, and I think this headline really sums it up quite nicely, which is more consumers are feeling optimistic about the economy, but they're also spending more cautiously, okay? Very important here. So again, as temperatures go up, we get into the summer, we hit the summer dead season, which I recently released a video on, walking you through some strategies to avoid the dreaded summer dead season where consumers stop spending as much on e-commerce. And really what we're seeing is, while there is a higher level of optimism, ultimately spending's dropping, okay? So let's get into it. First is consumer confidence, right? So optimism rose at the start of the second quarter of 2023, and optimism is currently trending upward, right? So people are more optimistic about the state of the economy. This is very correlated to spending, correlated to the stock market, correlated to overall business growth. But in general, even though it is growing, we're just not seeing that their spending is matching that optimism, right? So the level at which people spend at and the level of optimism can often be a lagging indicator, meaning that the spending can come much later than the optimism rises. But with that said, we're not seeing a huge growth in optimism, just a small percentage increase, but it's still good. In general, people are more optimistic now than they were 1, 2, 3 months ago, okay? For the second consecutive month, real spending growth was negative versus the prior year. So looking year over year, compared to last year, right, spending was actually negative for the second month in a row. That's actually big. So that means people are spending significantly less than they were last year, and we're seeing a lower spending growth than we did the previous month, okay? So very important to note here. So as we see spending trend downward, consumers are still cautious, and they're very just aware of a potential recession, right? So very important to keep in mind that if you're looking at your sales last year, again, people were spending significantly more, and really the last 2 months, people have just been spending actually at a negative level, okay? So very important to note. Now, of course, certain segments are affected more than others. So things like home goods and jewelry are being affected more, right? So jewelry retailers saw a negative growth of 12%, a huge drop compared to fitness, which actually saw a bit of growth, right? Which also, does make sense, especially with traveling also growing, right? As we get into summer, things like fitness, getting outside, travel, apparel, these kinds of things do go up. But some of these other segments are going way down, right? Because people are probably not looking to invest in an heirloom piece of jewelry right now. People are probably not looking to invest more in their home, which they already invested in when they're stuck there for 2 years, right? So just being aware which segment you are in. Some are growing more than others, but in general, we're seeing negative spending at the moment, okay? Now, with that said, we do work with a very big jewelry brand. We've worked with some big jewelry brands and some small ones, and we do see, if you do have a great brand buildup, you can still grow very fast and very well. In general, it's not going to be everyone, okay? Now, let's look at real spending by demographic, okay? So we'll put on the different age groups here, and as you see, people are pretty much in alignment, but for the first time in more than 2 years, spending declined across the board. So not only was this negative for the second consecutive month, but spending was, for the first time in 2 years, declining across all of the ages and all the income brackets, okay? And of course, what we'll see here is actually Gen Z spending the least, Gen X is spending the second least, and baby boomers are spending the most, right? So very low spending there. Now, what's interesting about this is that if we look at simply just looking at the all income group range here, we can see that Gen Z and millennials actually say they have the biggest intent to splurge, right? And intent to splurge is a hard metric to measure, but we can see that Gen Z, millennials, way more likely to splurge than Gen X, baby boomers, etc., which is interesting because actually right now and throughout a lot of the year, really, we've seen that while Gen Z wants to splurge, they're actually at the bottom of the spenders. They're spending the least, and they've seen the lowest amount of spending. While, baby boomers, the people who said they were going to splurge the least, are actually spending the most, right? So, of course, that can kind of somewhat make sense in general as far as who has the most income saved up. But in general, just keep in mind when you're marketing, if you're marketing to a Gen Z customer, know that, they want to be splurging. They want to be spending money more often than not. But in reality, they're spending the least. And if you're marketing to, say, baby boomers, keep in mind they don't want to be spending money. So that should be changing your messaging and your angles. But in reality, they're actually spending the most out of the three. So just keep that in mind when it comes to your messaging and angles and how you present price and how you orient your offer. Okay? Perfect. Now let's also go through income bracket levels and take a look at that. So just putting in high, low, and middle, which is basically like sub 50, 50 to 100, and then over 100 for the high income. And again, similar story, pretty in alignment, though high income was significantly more resilient. Low income obviously fluctuates quite a bit more, but we can see again, low income is actually at the very bottom, of course, middle, and then high going into this year. So again, everyone's pretty much on the same page. But again, this is the first time in more than 2 years that spending declined across the board. So even if you're a luxury product, even if you're a product in a more consumer and cost savvy niche, you still have to be cognizant of this, okay? So very important to note here, we just went through these splurging metrics. And again, it's just very important to keep in mind how you want to be orienting the value of your product in correlation to how much people want to splurge compared to how much they're actually spending, okay? Now, looking at intent to splurge per category, this is the last metric we'll actually go through here. Again, this changes with summer, but one of the biggest is restaurants. Of course, people are trying to get out more. And when it comes to that, people want new experiences. People want to travel, especially with summer. So, niches like restaurants, travel, apparel, where people are out and about. These are going to be things that are doing a lot better. Beauty and personal care, again, being more out and about, not inside as much, right? So with that, if you are in any of these niches, you should definitely be pushing if you can. And what we're seeing and what we're doing is we're actually orienting our products to fit into these niches more, right? So as we get into summer, as more people are traveling, we are orienting our messaging and our angles and ads and our emails and all that kind of stuff to be more aligned with that travel angle, right? So if we're selling wallets, it's going to be now a travel wallet, okay? If we're selling apparel, it's now going to be that perfect piece for your vacation, right? So we're trying to orient our products to fit with the customer's current psychological state and what they're currently thinking about and doing. Even if people are just traveling to a different city that's near them, that's still something that you can kind of fit your product into as an angle, right? So getting outside, traveling, just being out more, honestly working less, spending more time with friends and family. These are all things that people are thinking about and are on their minds. So again, if you can orient your product to fit into that more, you will do a lot better. So I would say a lot of brands can orient themselves into the travel niche, whether you're a CPG, consumer packaged goods brand, whether you're an apparel, footwear brand, even jewelry, you could fit into the travel niche if you sell more budget jewelry. So there's a bunch of different creative ways you can try to fit yourself more into some of these niches, which are more summer focused and which are doing better. Okay. Now, if we look at the bottom tier, of course, jewelry, as we went through before, right? People just aren't looking as much to invest in big jewelry pieces at the moment. And of course, like things like home goods, where people had been investing in 2020, these are also lower as that bubble kind of popped. As people were home, they're spending a lot in their house. Now, not so much, right? So again, all things to keep in mind when it comes to where people are willing to splurge. So if your target market is, in any of these categories that are really looking to splurge, help them out, orient your angles to align with their current desired splurge category, if that makes sense, okay? So very straightforward here. Now we could actually go through May and some other months, but I think this about wraps it up. So some key points, okay? First, keep in mind that for the second consecutive month, spending was negative versus the prior year. So if you're looking at last year's data and you feel bad, just keep this in mind, okay? Also looking at optimism. While we do see a higher and more optimistic consumer, keep in mind that spending does not align with that, though this can be a good sign for the coming months that that spending is on the way, okay? And of course, looking at your consumer, you know, in general, if you're targeting Gen Z and some of those younger generations, keep in mind that they do want to splurge, right? That they want to spend more money, but in reality, they're actually not spending as much as some of those older generations, and vice versa. The older generations here aren't really looking to splurge, but they are actually spending the most money. So good things to keep in mind. And of course, low, middle, and high income, everyone's at about the same spending level. So really no niche is safe. So if you are a luxury product or you are a more cost friendly product, keep that in mind. Keep in mind where people are currently at with their spending, okay? And when it comes to categories, again, in your marketing angles, in your email, SMS, website, landing page, and all of your messaging, keep in mind where people's heads are at. They're traveling, they're outside, they're with family, they're trying not to work as much, right? You know, this is where we're at. People want experiences. So help them buy your product and justify purchasing your product by aligning yourself with their current state of mind, which is travel, which is family. So fit your angles and your unique selling propositions into those niches, okay? So I hope this helps. If you do change your messaging angles and all that stuff to fit more with the current psychology of the consumer, I think you'll see much better conversion rates, better cost per acquisitions, better reactivation costs, and overall more growth in revenue. And I'll also say I recently recorded an hour-long training on how to research your consumer and use AI to actually power your marketing and advertising angles. So go ahead, check that video out. It will walk through how you can take this data and actually turn this into actionable messaging and marketing strategies so you can drive revenue. Cool. So hope that sounds good. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.